Welcome to Daily Cyber episode 293. I'm excited about this episode. We're going to talk a little bit more about AI and AI technology. I think the greatest thing that we're dealing with right now, individuals, organizations, people in IT, people in cybersecurity, it's this discussion about AI. What do we do? What do we think? What do we need to know? So today I have a great expert on the Daily Cyber today. John is the inventor of Kind, knowledge in depth, and a pioneer in artificial intelligence with over 40 years of experience building practical, trustworthy AI systems. His work spans both academic as well as entrepreneurship, including developing record-setting AI systems in checkers and poker, co-founding the Alberta Machine Intelligence Institute, and launching multiple AI ventures. Kind emerged from his belief that individuals should fully own and trust their data, offering a privacy-first local AI experience that allows users to curate, interact with, and gain insights from their personal knowledge without relying on the cloud. So this is going to be an amazing topic. Grab a coffee, grab a tea, and let's hack at it. Good afternoon, Jonathan. Give me 1 second here. Let me just make sure your audio's on. There we go. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, perfect.
There we go.
Delighted to be here.
Oh, so I think we have a lot to talk about, a lot of great topics. So how's your week been going so far?
Having a lot of fun. That's the acid test. If you're for somebody like myself who's in an exciting field, if it's fun, it's great. If it's frustrating, well,
might be time to switch fields.
Yes.
So you've been working in this field for 40 years. Walk me through kind of the evolution of your career.
Wow. Oh boy. Sorry, do we have 3 hours? Is that what the
we might need the Coles notes.
So I've been privileged to see literally the evolution of artificial intelligence from almost its primitive days. You can see I have gray hair, so that proves that I've been around a bit. But I actually got turned on to AI in the late 1970s.
Wow.
I was a chess player and I was going to university, and I happened to chance on a book that was called Computer Chess, and it was algorithms for programming a computer in those days to play chess. And of course, back then the chess programs were really weak, but I thought, wow, I play chess. I love computing. Why not write a chess program and combine two things that I love,
right,
and do something great? And so I started off doing that. And in those days, AI was pretty primitive.
Okay.
Those are the days where we had things called expert systems, where you had human experts who would basically input all the knowledge, define all the rules. So if you're a doctor and somebody says, hey, I've got a headache, the doctor would write out a set of rules. If you have a headache and it's this kind of headache, then maybe you should do this, or maybe we need to do this test. It was very prescriptive, and the programs would follow those rules. Okay. Very labor intensive, because you needed these experts who would just espouse things. And of course, nothing in real life is black and white.
Right.
Things are probabilistic, like just because he has a headache, do you take aspirin, or maybe it's a brain tumor? The things are always probabilistic. So these systems were extremely brittle. And then through the 80s, we had this revolution, which is still really ongoing, which was I guess negatively called brute force computing, where you take this big hammer
right
to this nail by just throwing massive amounts of computing onto something. And that was best epitomized in 1997. So that's 30 years ago, when the Deep Blue chess machine beat the world chess champion, Garry Kasparov. And there you had a machine that had been designed and built with special purpose chips to do 200 million chess positions per second, analyzing them. And of course, the human could only do about 2 positions a second. So you got if you're looking for a needle in a haystack, the best move in a chess position, if you're only looking at 2 pieces of hay per second versus 200 million, who's going to find the needle first?
Right.
And this is an analogy to what's going on today, because of course we have these massive data centers doing massive amounts of computing to analyze massive amounts of data, which take months and hundreds or thousands, tens of thousands of GPUs or AI processing units to produce these results. So the lessons of the past are still present today. And then, of course, we had the evolution in the early 2010 with deep learning came along, which all of a sudden showed the practicality of neural networks. And now, of course, we have the application of neural networks and to some extent reinforcement learning, and we still have this massive brute force computing and data, and we're pushing the envelope. And what's been interesting to me is it's like every decade you have to reinvent yourself as a scientist because the technology has changed. And that's probably true for entrepreneurs as well. The fundamental changes to technology have been amazing.
Right.
What's scary today, of course, is that it's not a decade anymore. It may actually be a year or two, that window in which you have to re-educate yourself and move on. It's, quite frankly, it's unprecedented in human history how fast, at least in the field of AI, the technology is evolving.
Well, I think that's to your point. I think the learning curve, when you have somebody's introduced to the industry, you have that curve that you have to kind of learn, and then all of a sudden it gets to the point where it reaches its peak. Everyone's kind of at a maturity, and then it slowly dwindles up because a new technology starts to come on, and then we rinse and repeat. That curve, I think, right now is, like you said, 10 years, 5 years, 2 years, 1 year. Like, it's shrinking. Now with AI, my prediction, my hypothesis, and people can see what they think, in a year or 2 years, we're talking probably months, right? Because you're not only looking at the intelligence of a human being to manufacture, develop software, whatever, but you now got tools there that can do it within minutes, like give you the schematics, give you the information, do all that for you, troubleshoot, do the analytics for you, give the reports and statistics, the testing environment, where you had to do that maybe over months, a year. They're doing it in hours, days, if that.
So I'm just going to give you a cautionary word. Be careful about saying anything that somebody might infer as a prediction.
Okay.
I gave up over a decade ago making predictions. And the reason is because I would make lots of predictions because people asked, media would always ask, and you'd say something that you thought was reasonable, and the basic idea was reasonable, but the time frame was always wrong.
Sure. Yeah.
And it was always wrong on the wrong side of the technology. If I said it would take a decade, it took 5 years. If I said it took 5 years, it took 2 years. And so every time I make a prediction, I end up looking foolish. And right now, with what's going on, any kind of predictions are just fraught with risk of looking silly. But what's happening here is really, it's mind-boggling, because we are seeing not just this curve that you showed, which sort of peaks and then starts tapering off. That's true. But we're seeing these jumps.
Yeah.
I'll give you a recent example. I mean, were we really seriously talking about agents 2 years ago? Were we really seriously talking about them a year ago? Yeah, the agents were around, but they weren't a big thing. Now we're talking about everything being agentic, which is another leap in capabilities and functionality. And to your point, it's automating a lot of things. Mm-hmm. The scary thing to me, though, still is when you look at the core technology, there are problems.
Okay.
November 30th, 2022 is sort of like a watershed in my life. You get born, that's a milestone. You graduate, that's a milestone. You get married, it's a milestone. You have your first kid, and then you graduate. Those are all milestones. But ChatGPT is a milestone in my life because on that day, it changed everything with AI, because what it demonstrated was something I really didn't expect to happen for quite a number of years. Another one of those predictions that just went by the wayside.
Right. Okay.
And I was in awe, like everybody was. And it was stunning, and rightly so. ChatGPT got massive media coverage, and there was this euphoria, and people were playing with it and delighted. But as a scientist, when you start looking at the algorithms and understanding what it's doing, you realize that the core algorithm is flawed.
Okay.
And it's not possible to fix the algorithm. There are some problems that are inherent in the algorithm, and you're not going to get rid of them. The only way to get rid of them is to invent a new algorithm that's better and addresses the problems.
Mm-hmm.
And that may happen. I mean, right now we're pouring how many tens, hundreds of millions of dollars just into pure AI research. And so who knows, with all that money going in, whether that next big leap forward is perhaps just around the corner. I don't know. But let me give you a perfect example. These LLMs, large language models, have hallucinations. We all know that. It's cute, right? Hallucinations is a terrible word. It's an attempt to anthropomorphize what these programs are doing.
Okay.
But let's be honest. You're in cybersecurity.
Mm-hmm.
It's an error.
Right.
It's a flaw. It makes mistakes. And depending upon what you're doing, those mistakes can be frequent or they could be relatively rare.
Right.
What a lot of work has been happening with LLMs is to what I call apply band-aids to the basic model.
Mm-hmm.
Let me give you a simple example. When I first saw ChatGPT in 2022, I was blown away. And a few days later, I was giving a talk, and people, wow, what's ChatGPT? So I gave a live demo, and I just stupidly asked the question, who is Jonathan Schaeffer? And it came back with my biography. That was impressive. Of course, we just quickly counted, and there were 15 factual mistakes.
Okay.
A year later, I did the same thing at a different conference. And well, afterwards, I saved the image and I looked through it, and there were 23 factual mistakes.
Okay.
And a year later, there were only 1 or 2.
Right.
What happened? ChatGPT got so much smarter and better. No, they applied a Band-Aid.
Right.
Well, if you're looking for a biography of a person, look in Wikipedia.
Right.
Take it from there. Oh, it's not there. Look in the Encyclopedia Britannica, or go to the Internet Movie Database, or some history, whatever database, right?
Right.
And so it wasn't a general purpose learning algorithm. It was having these patches that would go and look elsewhere and find information sometimes, which would allow the programs to get answers that looked much more correct, better results, but they were Band-Aids is what I called them.
Right.
So lots of them, and the error rate dropped. But the reality is, what these programs are at the simplest level, and there are lots of extensions to them, of course, are autocomplete, and that they try to anticipate what the next word is, and they string words together, which means that at various points they're flipping a coin. And most of the time they'll get the right answer, but because they're flipping a coin, sometimes they'll get the wrong answer.
Right.
And coin flipping is fundamental to these algorithms. If you take the coin flipping out, they're not interesting programs anymore. And so accuracy is a flaw. There will always be hallucinations. So, that's a flaw in these systems that we're not going to get away with. Another flaw is they are just stringing words together. They have no understanding of the semantics.
Okay.
You and I can read something and we have an understanding of what the meaning is. They don't. And so they will say things that to us look silly because semantically they don't make sense, or they'll say things that could be detrimental to tell you to do something that perhaps is unwise or even um, deadly.
Right.
And so, again, there are flaws with these models, and we tend to overlook them because most of the time it seems to do the right thing. There are security flaws with these models. I'm sure
Mhm.
your readers all know about injecting things into prompts that might cause some security breaches, etc.
Mhm.
So the problem here is we've got a great model. It's a leap forward. It's amazing what it can do, but we need to look for something better.
Okay.
And there are people looking for the next generation of chat-like programs.
Okay. So with that being said, I mean, you brought up some good points about the hallucination accuracy, right? They don't really understand contextual and or communication from the participant, the subject that's actually entering the information, and then you talked about security flaws. Knowing all that, like, what do we need to do? Like, what would be a solution?
Well, first of all, the solution is to find the right model.
Right.
And that's, a breakthrough like that, you can't predict breakthroughs. It could be tomorrow, it could be 10 years from now, who knows? ChatGPT was a breakthrough. It advanced our understanding enormously. So what do you do? Well, the first thing that always should be done when you're using a tool like this is education.
Okay.
And education, it's kind of scary um, how many people just are, I guess, resistant is probably too strong a word, but they just ignore being educated about these tools. I've met people who just believe everything that comes out of one of these chatbot programs. It could be ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude. Choose your favorite one. They trust what these programs say, and it's hard for them to understand that these programs could be lying or
Right.
make errors. We all know that it happens, and uh, educating people about the appropriate use and how not to use these programs, I think, is critically important. But there's two kinds of AI happening right now,
Okay.
and it's true for every field. But the first is I'll call it the revolutionary AI or the frontier AI, where everybody's trying to push the boundaries. We have this problem that everybody sees AI as this $1 trillion industry, and therefore everybody wants to be first to get somewhere. You want to have the biggest or best frontier model. And they're all racing
Mhm.
to try and get there. And that's a race that's full of risks because when you race to achieve something, you tend to make mistakes. And
Right.
there have been several cases of models that have been released that say have biases or have inappropriate behavior or answer questions in very silly ways. Anyway, there's revolutionary,
Right.
but there's also evolutionary, which is a little bit behind. Wait until something has been proven to be good and then use it and deploy it appropriately. My my vision for AI is probably different than most people, but it reflects my background. I grew up with Star Trek, okay?
Right.
The original Star Trek. And how did the AI work in the original Star Trek? You had Captain Kirk, who was talking to the computer, Spock talking to the computer, and the computer wasn't anthropomorphized. You'd ask a question, it would say computing, it would go off and do it, it would give you an answer, it could explain its reasons, it would give a probability of success. And if it couldn't answer a question, it said, I don't know.
Right.
Great. That's exactly what you want with an assistant, where you ask a question and get exactly what you need with no fluff.
Right.
Of course, later on in Star Trek: The Next Generation, we had Data, which was an Android computer, and it had basically the same pattern. So that's what I want. I want AI that responds to me, is accurate, doesn't lie or misrepresent.
Right.
And so that's the motivation for me leaving academia. I left the university after 40 years. I great time teaching, great time doing research. And then I started a company called Schaeffer Software Solutions Inc. We have our first product on the market, and what it's doing is private, accurate AI for your desktop.
Okay.
In other words, we only use your data on your machine in a way which guarantees the accuracy. It's not going to be influenced by external sources. So if you want to know what the world is, you want to ask a question about the world, you go and ask Google. You want to ask something about your data, our tool answer about your data and only your data. And it's evolutionary AI. We're not bleeding edge. We don't use much agent technology. Why? Because I only want to deploy it in a way that's safe. I want to create an environment that allows people to trust the AI, that if I ask it a question, I get the answer that's accurate, it's founded in my data. And I don't want to put my data into the cloud because that's a privacy concern. I have lots of issues with big corporate companies and their insatiable quest for data. I want my data private to me. So that's the philosophy that we have, and it addresses many of the problems that exist in the AI world today. But if you're looking for the latest and greatest, that's next year or the year after, because we're always 6 months, a year behind the leading edge, because we want to make sure everything is safe and secure so that you know that what you're getting will give you an appropriate experience.
So with that being said, I mean, you're talking about a local AI. I mean, I'll give an example. Claude can now integrate with your systems, your email, like everything. It can organize your file structure. It can review all that. Why wouldn't I go with that versus this local solution?
Because you're dealing with Claude, which means it's interfaced to the internet,
Right.
and therefore that data can be used or abused. Do you trust Anthropic? Do you trust Gemini? Google? Do you just trust Microsoft? You know, I'm not trying to say that I'm paranoid, but I have data that I don't want to see in the cloud. Let's say personal data, medical data, family data. I have intellectual property. I have all sorts of things that I don't want to give access to because they're my personal assets.
Right.
And so in our tool, the current version does use an internet connection, but the new version that's coming out in a few weeks is 100% local. You can just turn off the internet and you get high quality AI on your data.
Right.
And what you can do on your desktop is pretty good. It's not as good as, say, going out to the internet and using Claude and Google. Google's last time I looked, their models got like, I don't know, 10 trillion parameters, something like that. When you put something on your desktop, you'll have a few billion parameters. So there's no doubt that the internet AI is better.
Right.
But there's risks. I don't want my data out there. It's a matter of privacy. It's also a matter of security.
So basically, from what I'm understanding is, these two solutions, again, one's on cloud, one's on prem. But when you're looking at data privacy and you're looking at security, you're looking at making a kind of a sandbox environment that your data is not going to get out there, having a local solution like yourself is the better way to go, because now you create privacy, you create an isolation. You're not sharing files, data, information, analytics with an outside party.
Exactly. And it's not for everybody. I mean, I've talked to people who say, I don't care. I'm just going to put all my data in the cloud.
Right.
And for some people, that's perfectly fine. And I know there are extreme people that I know who have their data on their own computer that's never been connected to the internet because for whatever reason, their data is extremely important to them. I have colleagues who generate intellectual property and they are paranoid about getting that intellectual property possibly stolen. And I can also point to security breaches in the past. at various places, including at my university, where personal data has been exposed, etc. And I'd rather just keep my data on my machine and make sure that it's secure. I don't want to trust external people.
Right. Which
External
makes sense. Like, especially on a security standpoint, completely makes sense. So with the local AI solution, we're talking about like the difference of personal data. Like what are the mechanism it uses to actually protect your data? Like we talked about being local. Is there any other like encryption? Is there any other methods or controls it helps to protect that data?
Well, there are a couple of things. So first of all, the current version of our product is called hybrid kind, because what it does is do most of the data processing on your desktop, but it uses, in this case, currently it uses Google Gemini for image analysis, because the image analysis that Google can do in the cloud is so much, or was so much better than what you could do on the desktop.
Right.
So there are several aspects to privacy. Data, images that go to Google, they're sent securely. Information is obfuscated. Google doesn't know where it comes from because it comes through an anonymized server. It's only the information that's necessary goes out there. The information comes back and is used. So it's not perfect security, but it's pretty good, and it's a quality versus security, a privacy trade-off.
Right.
The local version only uses the data that you provide. There is no training. There is no monetization of your data. There's no leakages of the data. It stays within this nugget of knowledge that you create. And as I said, there's no internet connection. You don't have to use the internet. The only time you use the internet is basically to download the product. And the security, unfortunately, is always a function of the weakest link.
Right.
And the user, the owner of the machine, is often the weakest link. And so the data is there, it's on your machine. Future versions will have the data encrypted to make sure that should there be a leakage, that there's no problems. But we can't solve those problems.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I didn't know if the data was encrypted at rest. Again, if anyone like you're talking about, like the user can be, the phishing campaign, they can click on a link in malware, and then if that data is in plain text, right, from the LLM or from the local AI, that they can now glean that information. So I didn't know if there was encapsulation of encryption. I'd store like the data that they're using or the cache files that were encrypted at rest. That's what I was asking that.
Yeah, nothing leaves, your data never leaves the confines of the program kind. It creates its own data repository. All the information is there and managed. And there's no leakage that comes out from that, other than, of course, if some bad actor breaks into your machine
Right.
and has, well, super user access. So that's a problem.
Now, one thing you talked about earlier was about like teaching and being able to be educated and being able to understand and explain the solution that someone like, I'll use myself or someone else is looking at with AI. How important is that? The explainability.
The explainability of AI, how important is it?
Mm-hmm.
It's critical.
Okay.
Neural networks are an amazing technology. There was this joke that neural networks were always the second best way to solve a machine learning problem. They've been around for decades. Geoffrey Hinton spent decades researching them, and it was a good technology, but there was always something better.
Right.
And then with deep learning, which basically came out of his lab, everything exploded, and people were just on the deep learning bandwagon because the results were amazing. And then people started realizing, of course, that these results were being used in ways that had real world implications, like I just got denied a mortgage, or I've been denied bail, or something like that.
Right.
And the question was, why? These deep learning based algorithms, and this includes LLMs, they are giant neural networks. And what they are connections with trillions of parameters, trillions of numbers. And so from the algorithm's point of view, the explanation of a decision is trivial. Here is a trillion parameter mathematical formula, and you plug in all the information and out comes a number, and that's your answer. So from some sense, we know what the explanation is. The problem is, of course, that makes sense to a computer. It doesn't make sense to a human. How do you take the knowledge or the information that's inside one of these neural nets and translate it into our language, such as English, something that you and I can easily understand?
Right.
And this is an area of incredible research. And a general neural network, a large complex general neural network, like you might see in an LLM, it's very difficult to extract that knowledge because it's just numbers, and humans will look through this to try and identify patterns. That's manual. We don't want to be doing manual. It's hard. There are systems out there which can be made explainable, but that means changing the model to do certain things in certain ways so that it's easily mappable to a human concept.
Right.
And like kneecapping the capabilities of these models in order to be able to get clear, rational explanations out of them. So I don't know what the end result here will be. Clearly, there's a lot of work on explainability. It's extremely hard, particularly for neural networks. And the current solution, which works well, but it only works on simplified systems and won't do the kind of explanation you need on a much bigger real world LLM. So it's not my area of expertise, and it's critically important that we solve this problem. Humans will need explanations for decisions. You don't want to go to a doctor and the doctor says you have 3 months to live, and you ask why, what's going on, and the program has no answer. It's unacceptable.
Right. Which, yeah,
especially since these programs have hallucinations and can make mistakes, you need an explanation.
Right. And I think that's what I was going to say, is because depending on the value in the information that you're getting as well, you're receiving through the dialogue, right? Because like you said, if you're going to a doctor and you say, I have a bump in my back, what is it? And they're not giving you the right information. And maybe it's a tumor, maybe it's a bruise, maybe whatever. But if that AI is not, in our analogy, that doctor is not giving you the right prescription, or at least assessing it properly, you can go off left, right, up, down, and on a different tangent. And I think that's the challenge that we're talking about with the hallucinations that we're getting from AI right now. That's the challenge. And I think my feeling is that the explainability is the part of the due diligence that people need to go through to understand the AI technology, how they're going to use it, how it's going to be used in their environment. Like talking about corporations and people I work with, how are they going to use it, how they can deploy, wrapping policies around it to make sure there's controls, not only technical controls, but government compliance controls in their organization that now controls what can be done and what can't be done with the AI as it evolves. Because there's things that people, and you're saying that they will just use it for the sake of using it and will put anything in it, right?
Well, you're touching on some really important issues, which includes corporate governance of how the AI is used, when it should be used, how it should be used. But there's another thing about AI that just doesn't make sense to me. Given how impactful these programs can be, surely there needs to be some way that we have confidence that these programs are doing what they're supposed to be doing in a fair and responsible way.
Mhm.
I won't name names, but I'm sure we can all think of AI models that are out there that have had unfortunate behavior or biased behavior. I can think of one model out there which is strongly biased and everybody seems to know it, and I won't use it because of that.
Right.
But there's no quality control. I mean, if I'm buying a car, I know about the quality control of these cars. The government has all sorts of tests that are manufacturers have to pass to ensure that this is a safe vehicle and meets their standards of quality and reliability. But we don't have that in the AI world.
No.
Um, if my car said, if the car that I was driving said, "Hey, your brakes are only accurate 99% of the time," that sounds pretty impressive, 99% of the time. But of course, I don't want to get on the highway and have to brake and know that my brakes only work 99% of the time. That's terrifying.
Right.
We look at these models right now, and they have an error rate. Are they 99% accurate? I'm not so sure about that. At least, and
Mhm.
I'm not a typical user, but I see lots of errors that these tools can make. And so we're just accepting that these programs uh, do things that are accurate when they're not. The error rate is high. There's no quality control. There's no guarantees about bias. We just have to trust the vendors. Do we believe in self-regulation? I don't want to overly uh, I was going to say the word bureaucratized, put in extra bureaucracy.
Right.
But as somebody who wants to have confidence in the products I'm using, given how I'm using these tools, I need to know that they are doing the kind of job that I want, which include, accuracy and bias, and how is it trained, and is that reflective of what I expect in this kind of a tool?
Right.
And it's caveat emptor right now. You have to trust the major companies that they're doing a good job. And some of them are, I'm sure. I have no doubt about that. But I also know some that aren't.
Right. And I think that's the challenge too. Is like you have to test the measurable results. You have to put these systems in, and you have to do the due diligence. That you talked about, and I agree with you. There's not blind faith. You can't the data and information, the answers you get. You can't blindly just trust that information. You have to go back and go through and do your due diligence, because I know like there's people that I've worked with where they'll run a data analysis on data and ask it to give it two reports, and the reports are different. The data is different. They're like, well, how can it be different? It should be the exact same. The root data hasn't changed. So what changed in that report? And then it looked at it a different way. It did something that it was went a different direction. And you're like, why? I asked you to give me this variables on this report, do that, and it asked the same prompt again, and it should have did the same exact thing, but it doesn't. So I think that's where we need like subject matter experts and individuals to validate the output.
This is going back to the hallucinations problem.
Mhm.
There's a coin flip involved.
Yeah.
It's fundamental to these algorithms. And we want the coin flip because otherwise the tool will be completely deterministic and you'll always get the same answer. Whether it be the right answer or not, who knows? You'll always get the same thing. But for many applications, you want that randomness, you want that diversity, you want it to try different things and give you different perspectives. But with that comes consequences. And you're absolutely right. I've seen documented reports that are completely different. And you'll run a particular, I've run tests on certain types of reports, and 9 times out of 10, it gives me what I think is the right answer. And 1 time out of 10, it gives me the wrong answer.
Mhm.
Well, if nobody else is going to be patient enough to do an experiment and try to do the same report 10 times, you're going to do it once, and you're going to take that report and treat it as gospel.
Right.
And now you've walked down a rabbit hole which might have terrible consequences,
Mhm.
including hurting your credibility. I mean, all these, they don't appear anymore, but certainly in the early days of ChatGPT, you saw all these stories of people who just blindly took the AI results and used them and faced the consequences in the media often.
And that's the challenging thing. That I mean, I agree with you. I think it's until we have AI evolves more, you got to have due diligence. You got to have your checks and balances in place as you use it. If you're going to use these tools, and I mean, I think from what you're talking about in the security aspect, a local LLM that is more controlled, local AI that's more controlled, I think is better for most organizations now in this day and age versus going out to the wild, wild west of Claude, Anthropic, Claude, ChatGPT, any of these Gemini. I think you kind of buyer beware, right?
So look at it this way. The major AIs are all trained on basically the whole internet, every piece of data that they can get. And some of that data is really good and high quality, and some of it is, well, suspect and shouldn't be there. And people are playing games, putting data on the web that helps perhaps bias the training of these LLMs.
Mm-hmm.
Not interested in that. The point here is that it is using data that might be suspect. With a local LLM on my machine, using only the data that I want it to train on, and sorry, we don't do the training, just using only the data that you give me, no external sources,
Right.
then when you ask questions, you get answers that are only from your data because there's nothing else there. And if it doesn't know, it comes back quite simply. And one of the interesting things about asking questions about your data is you discover what you know, and sometimes it's very insightful to see what you don't know. When you go on the internet, you always get an answer. It's rare that you get something which says, hey, I really don't know the answer. But when it's coming out of your data, which is a really small data set, right?
Mm-hmm.
The information you're looking for is either there or it's not there. You get a black and white answer. There's no vagueness about it, and there's no external sources that pollute the answers that you're getting.
True. Yeah, no, that makes sense, right? Because like you said, I'll validate that it doesn't know. It can't find the answer, right? Where
And it tells me, hey, maybe I need to add some data. Maybe there's something out there that I forgot. I'll give you a perfect example. This is a simple example, but I used Kind in the last course I taught at the university. It was an operating systems course. And we have a version of this program that is not commercially available right now. Maybe later this year it will be. And what it does is allow me to put in the data, and the students in the class can all access the data. They
right,
can't add data, but they can read it. So it's basically a common, shared, curated knowledge repository. No external sources except what's in the data. And of course, it's a course that I'm teaching. So what did I do? I ingested into it all my PowerPoint slides, my course syllabus, uh, all of the previous term's lectures, 50-minute videos times 39 lectures,
right,
previous midterms and exams, putting in the assignments, putting in the course readings, everything to do with the course was there.
right,
And the students loved it because when they asked a question, they got an answer from my course. I had one student come in on the final exam saying, hey, you marked this question wrong. And I said, no, I didn't mark it wrong. Your answer is incorrect. And he said, but look, ChatGPT tells me the answer is this, which agrees with my answer.
right.
Well, ChatGPT is wrong, right? The point here is that when students would ask questions, they would only get it from my answers, my data, not the world. But one of the facilities we had is, okay, build me a word cloud of my course.
Right.
I did that just for fun because I wanted to see what my course was. And I was shocked.
Okay.
In this course, a major component was security. And
Right.
when the word cloud came out, there was securities, this tiny little dot in my word cloud. In other words, I was hardly teaching anything about security in the course. I had no idea. But of course, if I give it all of my data that I used to teach the course, and it can do this kind of analysis, it gives me insights that I didn't know. It didn't say, yeah, you're not doing security. Of course it didn't. But it showed me that I was doing very little in security. And I would never find out things like that if I was using Google or Claude, because this was all about my data and only my data, not anybody else's version of this course.
Right. So we've got about 10 minutes left. What's some closing thoughts and takeaways if someone was looking at AI right now you would recommend?
Wow. This is not because I'm an AI professor, obviously, or sorry, a former professor, but we need an educated public. AI, as it exists right now, is an incredibly powerful tool, and it needs to be used appropriately. And I've just met far too many people who are doing what I think are silly things, such as putting personal things into the internet, into these programs that they shouldn't, um, trusting these programs. Um, I would say just irresponsible usage of these tools. Sometimes they think it's funny, uh, but it's not. These systems learn, they adapt.
Right.
Anything that you do, even a query, just going to ChatGPT and asking a very simple question, it learns something from that question. The very fact that you asked it is an interesting data point. And yes, okay, a single question is minuscule amount of extra knowledge, but it's another dimension of how these tools are learning from us.
Right.
People need to be educated. And this is not fear mongering. It's just like anything, you need to know how to use something responsibly. If you buy, if you get a car, there's got to be rules of the road. You know how to use it responsibly. You're not going to speed. You're not going to cut people off. You respect pedestrians. I mean, there's all sorts of practical things. And when it comes to these LLMs, it's important to understand what you should and you shouldn't do. And just to know that they do make mistakes and you need to fact check. So the first thing I would recommend everybody is to get educated. And people who are listening to your talk, to this talk, are probably already sophisticated users, so that's not the problem. But the problem is you're the exception, right?
Right.
Mass of people out there are not AI computer people. They don't understand the nuances of what's happening on, and so we need public education.
Yep.
Second thing is, I really believe that we need to put some guidelines or guardrails in place to ensure that uh, products that get released to the public have been vetted in some way to ensure that they are safe, secure, as reasonably free of bias, accurate as possible. I don't know about you. When I was growing up, I remember on the TV, many products often had something called like the Good Housekeeping Seal of Approval, that these products had been vetted by an agency that said that these are high quality products. And I trusted that, or my parents would trust it, and they would buy products that had sort of that stamp of approval. Maybe it's like ISO, right? The International Standards Organization. We have standards for doing responsible, ethical AI, and it's not just on the frontier models, but it's also in these products.
Right.
I've downloaded things from the internet, products that look cool and interesting, and then tried them out and, just surfed them. They're junk. Nobody's vetted them for AI accuracy or bias or anything like that. It's a wild west out there, and I would love to see some sort of agency that could properly test these products, understand how in particular with the AI, what it's supposed to do, what the algorithms are, what the data it's been trained on, and whether it's giving you a responsible answer to the kinds of interactions that a user would have. And maybe that's a government body. I don't believe in corporate self-regulation because there's a history of it not succeeding, but we need that. Another thing we need, which is almost impossible to happen, is we need a nimble government.
Okay.
The reality is that AI is changing so quickly, and there needs to be rules and regulations. The fact that people can create deep fakes, put them on the internet, and face no consequences, or pornography, or that chatbots can manipulate unsuspecting people to do things that are inappropriate, or that you can put malicious code online that will inject some awful thing into your workflows. It's a changing landscape because the technology is evolving so quickly, and putting the words government and nimble in the same sentence is clearly an oxymoron, but there have to be consequences for bad behavior, and quite frankly, I don't see it. And if there are in some cases, it just takes forever for them to be enacted. So, Europe has done a lot in terms of trying to regulate AI and enforce things like explainability for decisions that AI products must be able to do. That's great, but it's still moving at too slow a pace to handle what's happening today. And I just think things are going to accelerate. I don't have an answer, but making people aware that we need to solve these problems are really important. And I guess lastly, we all appreciate that we are in uncharted territory with AI's capabilities, and there's a lot of doom and gloom sayers out there that AI can take over the world. And how about a lot less fear mongering and a lot more proactive work at trying to put guardrails in place and making sure that these terrible scenarios just can't happen. When nuclear technology first appeared with the bombing of in Japan in the 1940s, people realized we had a terrible weapon on our hands, and it took decades and decades before we were able to put controls in place. And yeah, okay, there's still 2 or 3 bad actors in the world, but basically everybody else conforms with regulations and nuclear technology. But now it's a relatively safe technology, and we use it for all sorts of things other than building bombs, like NMR devices for medical diagnosis.
Right.
I think it's the same thing with AI. It can't be something that's just isolated to one government or one region. The internet makes everything global. We all need to be working together nationally and internationally to deploy this incredible technology in the best way possible, because what the technology can do for the world in terms of improving our quality of life is amazing. Just think of the medical breakthroughs that are potentially possible with this technology.
Right.
So we need to talk about the good things that AI can do and put the guardrails in place so the bad things, if they're indeed possible, just can't happen.
No, totally makes sense. I mean, that's a lot of great points. Education, guardrails, government, control, but not nimble, of course. I mean, it's like you said, I work for the Ontario government, so you're talking about like government being nimble is kind of funny. It's kind of in the same sentence, right? But and then, like you said, the fear mongering about like people doom and gloom and oh my God, Skynet's coming and they're going to take over the world. It's going to be another Terminator movie. I think those are all good things that most organizations and their people need to take into a core foundation as they start looking at AI and AI solutions. Now, Jonathan, for people to reach out to you, LinkedIn's probably the best to kind of connect with you globally.
Sure. Yep.
So I've got Jonathan's LinkedIn. If you guys are looking at the show notes or things below, you'll see Jonathan's URL. You can go reach out to Jonathan. Also, we've got Kind, his websites here, kind.synsira.com. Check that out. You know, he's got a lot of great information on his website. Jonathan, thank you so much for being on the stream. A lot of great information. I really appreciate it.
Listen, Brandon, I really appreciate talking to you. I enjoyed it very much. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jonathan. So give me a second here. So everyone, I mean, you look at this Daily Cyber and you look at kind of all the information that Jonathan's provided. Like you talk about accuracy, you talk about, you know, the flaws in security, you talk about the education, the revolution, the frontier, the evolution. I want you guys to go back and watch this, and everything that Jonathan's talking about is real world information that I think everyone needs to kind of look at and almost use as a checklist and an evaluation of where you currently are when it comes to AI and your understanding, where you want to get to, some of the concerns that you might have. If you don't, you should have to evaluate properly. You know, we talked about data privacy, data control. We talked about hallucination, the information, the due diligence on your organization. I mean, there was a lot of great information when it came from this. So I think right now, you know, go back, watch this Daily Cyber again. Make sure you've taken notes. Go back through. If you have any questions for Jonathan, reach out to Jonathan and say, look, you know, I'm looking at AI. What would be your recommendation? What would you want, you know, recommend I do? Jonathan has a great solution he's talking about where it's more local controlled AI on your local systems that now removes a lot of that security and concern. So a lot of great things. So that's it for today's Daily Cyber. Don't forget, software's hackable, being connected is vulnerable. I'll see you next Daily Cyber.